The full moon hung heavy over the village square, like a silver coin pressed against black velvet. Its light spilling across cobblestones, worn smooth by centuries of hurried feet. Iris Shadowvale stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, her white hair catching moonbeams and transforming them into liquid starlight. Around her, wolves called to their mates, voices rising in ancient harmonies that made the very air tremble with longing. But Iris felt only the familiar hollow ache of being utterly, completely alone. She pulled her cloak tighter, watching as pair after pair found each other in the ceremonial dance, their eyes blazing with recognition, with destiny. The choosing moon came once a year, and for the 5th year, Iris remained unclaimed, unwanted. The other Omegas had already been swept into strong arms, already pressed against broad chests that rumbled with possessive growls. She turned away from the celebration, her throat tight with unshed tears, and that was when she heard it. A small broken sob coming from the shadows between 2 merchant stalls. Iris froze, her Omega instincts flaring to life despite her own grief. She moved toward the sound, her steps silent on the ancient stones, and found him huddled against a wooden barrel. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes wide with terror. His clothes were torn, dirt smudged across his pale cheeks, and he trembled like a leaf in a storm. "Hello, little one," Iris whispered, crouching down to his level, making herself small and unthreatening. "Are you lost?" The boy flinched, pressing himself harder against the barrel, but something in Iris's gentle tone, in the lavender and rain scent that marked her as Omega, made him pause. His lower lip quivered. "I can't find him," the child whimpered, his voice breaking on the words. "I can't find my papa." Iris's heart shattered and reformed in the space of a heartbeat. She extended her hand slowly, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "My name is Iris. What's yours?" "Alexander," he whispered. And then, as if the name itself had broken down his last defenses, he launched himself into her arms. Iris caught him instinctively, wrapping him in her cloak, in her warmth, in the safety she wished someone would offer her. He was so small, so fragile, and he smelled of pine forests and something else, something powerful and ancient that she couldn't quite place. Above them, the moon burned brighter, and the mating howls grew more frenzied, but Iris heard only Alexander's racing heartbeat against her chest. "Shh, sweetheart, shh," she murmured, rocking him gently. "We'll find your papa, I promise. Can you tell me what he looks like?" Alexander pulled back just enough to look at her with eyes too old for his young face, eyes that held shadows no child should know. "He's the biggest wolf in the whole world," he said with a child's absolute certainty. "And he's very sad. Mama went to the moon, and now Papa is always sad." The words pierced through Iris like silver arrows. A widower, then, a father searching for his lost son while the choosing moon mocked them both with its abundance of new bonds, new beginnings that would never belong to the broken. "Then we'll find the biggest wolf in the whole world," Iris said firmly, standing with Alexander still cradled in her arms. He was heavier than she expected, solid and real, and something fierce and protective unfurled in her chest. For the first time in 5 years, she had a purpose beyond her own loneliness. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. They moved through the crowd, Iris calling out descriptions, asking if anyone had seen a frantic father searching for his son. But the wolves were too lost in their own destiny dances, too consumed by the magnetic pull of their chosen mates. No one stopped. No one cared. Alexander's grip on her neck tightened, and she felt his silent tears soaking into her shoulder. "It's all right," she whispered against his hair. "I've got you. I won't let you go." And she meant it with every fiber of her being. They searched for an hour, then 2, moving beyond the village square into the darker streets where the moonlight struggled to penetrate. Alexander had grown quiet, exhausted, his small body going limp with sleep against her chest. Iris's arms ached, her feet throbbed, but she refused to stop. She would carry him until dawn if necessary. She would carry him until the world ended. That was when she felt it. A presence that made every hair on her body stand at attention. A power so immense it seemed to warp the very fabric of the night around them. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant, frost forming on the cobblestones beneath her feet, and a growl rolled through the darkness like distant thunder. Iris turned slowly, instinctively shifting Alexander behind her, her body becoming a shield, despite the fact that she was nothing, no one, just an unclaimed Omega with no pack and no protection. But she would die before she let anything harm this child. From the shadows stepped a man who could only be described as a force of nature, contained in flesh. He was massive, well over 6 feet of pure muscle wrapped in black leather and suppressed rage. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of midnight, his beard only emphasizing the brutal beauty of his features. But it was his eyes that stopped Iris's heart. They were amber, burning like molten gold, and they held an agony so profound that she felt it in her bones. "Alexander," the man said, and his voice was gravel and silk, command and desperation woven together. "Papa!" Alexander's cry was pure joy. He squirmed in Iris's arms, reaching for the giant of a man, and Iris felt the loss of his weight like a physical blow. But she released him. Of course she did, watching as the man caught his son with a gentleness that contradicted every hard line of his body. He held Alexander close, burying his face in the boy's hair, his massive shoulders shaking with relief so intense it was almost violent. Iris took a step back, then another, preparing to fade into the night the way she always did, to return to her solitary existence. Her job was done. The boy was safe. That was all that mattered. "Stop." The single word froze her in place, not because it was loud, but because it carried the weight of absolute authority, of power, that could crush mountains and part seas. She turned back slowly to find those golden eyes locked on her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "You protected my son," the man said. And there was something raw in his voice now, something beneath the steel. When no one else even looked, when the entire pack was too busy with their own selfish pursuits to help a child in need. "Anyone would have done the same," Iris said softly, though they both knew it was a lie. "No." He shook his head, taking a step toward her, and Iris had to force herself not to retreat. "No, they wouldn't have. And they didn't. You carried him for hours. I could smell your exhaustion, your pain." Another step. "Why?" Iris looked at Alexander, who was watching her with sleepy eyes over his father's shoulder, his small hand still reaching toward her as if reluctant to break their connection. "Because he needed someone," she said simply. "And I know what it's like to need someone and find only emptiness." The man's eyes flashed with something she couldn't name, something that made the air between them crackle with electricity. "Your name, Omega." It wasn't a question. Alphas like this, alphas who commanded with every breath, didn't ask. But Iris had spent too long being invisible to be afraid of visibility now. "Iris Shadowvale," she said, lifting her chin. "And yours, Alpha." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone like lightning. "Dante Nightforge." The world tilted on its axis. Dante Nightforge, the Alpha King, the legend who ruled the northern territories with an iron fist and a broken heart. The widower who had lost his mate to a rival pack's attack 3 years ago and had been slowly freezing into something more ice than man ever since. And she, an unclaimed Omega from the lowest rank, had just spent the evening carrying his lost son through the streets like he was her own. "I didn't know," Iris breathed, horrified. "I should have. I'm sorry. I should have recognized." "Don't." Dante's voice cut through her spiraling panic like a blade. Don't apologize for treating my son like he was precious instead of a political tool. Don't apologize for being the only wolf in this entire forsaken village with a heart still beating." Alexander yawned, nuzzling into his father's neck, and Dante's expression softened in a way that transformed him from terrifying king to devoted father in the span of a heartbeat. "We need to get him home," he murmured, but his eyes never left Iris's face. "Will you come with us?" "What? No, I couldn't possibly—" "Please." The word shattered something in Iris's chest. An alpha king, the most powerful wolf in the territories, was saying please to her, an unclaimed omega with nothing to offer but the clothes on her back, and a heart that had already been broken too many times to count. "He won't settle unless he knows you're safe," Dante continued, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. "And neither will I." Iris looked at Alexander, who had lifted his head and was watching her with those two knowing eyes, his small hand still extended in silent plea. And she knew, with the certainty of the moon's eternal cycle, that she was already lost. That saying yes would change everything, that walking away was no longer an option her battered heart could survive. "All right," she whispered. "I'll come." Dante's exhale was pure relief. He shifted Alexander to one arm with unconscious ease, then extended his free hand to Iris. She stared at it for a long moment, at the calluses that spoke of weapons wielded and battles won, at the strength that could crush but chose to cradle. Then she placed her smaller hand in his, and felt the world click into place with an audible snap that only they could hear. The walk to the Alpha King's residence was surreal. The streets cleared before them, wolves bowing and stepping aside, their eyes wide with shock at seeing their frozen king holding hands with an unknown omega while carrying his son. Iris wanted to pull away, to hide from the scrutiny, but Dante's grip was unbreakable, and strangely, she found she didn't want to break it. The Alpha King's home was a sprawling manor on the edge of the village, all dark stone and towering windows that reflected the moon like captured silver. But inside, it felt empty despite its size, cold, despite the fires burning in every hearth. This was a place of grief, Iris realized, a monument to loss. Dante led her up a winding staircase to a bedroom clearly meant for a child, but somehow still feeling too large, too lonely. He laid Alexander on the bed with infinite care, smoothing back his dark hair, pressing a kiss to his forehead that was so tender Iris had to look away from the intimacy of it. "Will you stay?" Alexander murmured, his hand finding Iris's again. "Just until I fall asleep?" Iris glanced at Dante, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She sank onto the edge of the bed, and Alexander immediately curled into her side, his small body trusting in a way that made her throat tight. She began to hum softly, an old lullaby her own mother had sung before she died, before Iris had learned what it meant to be truly alone. Dante stood in the doorway, watching them with an expression that Iris couldn't decipher. There was hunger there, yes, but also confusion, and beneath it all, a longing so deep it seemed to have no bottom. Alexander's breathing evened out, his hand going slack in hers, and still Iris hummed, unable to stop, unwilling to break this fragile moment of peace. When she finally fell silent and carefully extracted herself from Alexander's grip, Dante was waiting in the hallway, his eyes tracking her every movement like a predator studying its prey. But there was nothing threatening in his gaze now, only questions. "Thank you," he said quietly. He hasn't slept that peacefully in months. "He misses his mother," Iris said, because it was obvious, and she wouldn't insult this man with platitudes. "Every day." Dante's jaw clenched. "Every hour. And I can't fill that void for him no matter how hard I try. I'm an alpha. I'm a king. I can destroy armies and level cities. But I can't give my son back his mother." The raw honesty in his words stole Iris's breath. She took a step toward him before she could stop herself, drawn by that pain, the way a moth is drawn to flame. You're doing your best, she said softly. Any child who runs to his father with that much joy, who calls for him with that much trust, knows he's loved beyond measure. Dante's eyes flashed, and suddenly he was moving, closing the distance between them in 2 strides, backing her gently against the wall with his body a wall of heat before her. He wasn't touching her, but she could feel him everywhere, his power, his presence, his devastating need. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough. "What are you?" "No one," Iris whispered, even as her body betrayed her, arching toward him, seeking his warmth. "Just an Omega who's as lost as your son was tonight." "Liar." The word was almost gentle. Dante lifted one hand, hesitating just inches from her face, and Iris realized he was asking permission. She nodded, barely breathing, and his palm cupped her cheek with a tenderness that made tears spring to her eyes. "You smell like lavender and rain and something else. Something I thought I'd never scent again." "What?" Iris breathed, lost in those golden eyes. "Hope." The word hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Dante's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen, and his expression shifted into something almost wondering. "I've been dead inside for 3 years, he said, his voice dropping to a confession meant only for her. Walking, breathing, ruling, but dead nonetheless. "And then I saw you standing there, protecting my son with your body, offering your safety for his, and something in me that I thought was gone forever roared back to life." Iris's heart was a wild thing in her chest, threatening to break free. "Dante, I can't. I'm just—" "Everything," he interrupted, leaning closer until his forehead rested against hers, until they were breathing the same air. "You're everything I didn't know I was still searching for." "You don't know me," Iris protested weakly, even as her hands lifted of their own accord to rest against his chest, feeling the thundering of his heart beneath her palms. "Then let me know you." It was the second time he'd said please, and Iris felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling like sand castles before the tide. "Stay. Not just tonight. Stay." "People will talk," Iris said, grasping at reasons, at logic, at anything to keep from falling into this impossible dream. "An unclaimed Omega in the Alpha King's home. It's not proper, it's—" "I don't care." Dante pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and Iris saw steel there now. The iron will that had made him king. "Let them talk. Let them whisper and gossip and spread whatever poison they want. You saved my son. You brought light into this house of darkness, and I will not let you disappear into the night like you never existed." "What are you asking me?" Iris whispered, terrified of the answer, terrified of the hope blooming in her chest like spring after an endless winter. Dante's lips curved into the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face, turning him from dark king to something almost boyish, almost vulnerable. "I'm asking you to take a chance, to let me court you properly, the way an Omega like you deserves, to give me the opportunity to show you that maybe, just maybe, the choosing moon wasn't wrong. Maybe it was just waiting for us to find each other in our own time, in our own way." Iris thought of the 5 years she'd spent watching others find their mates, the loneliness that had become as familiar as breathing, the certainty that she would live and die unclaimed. And then she thought of Alexander's small hand in hers, of the trust in his eyes, of this fierce, broken man who was offering her not just a place in his home, but a place in his heart. "All right," she said, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "I'll stay." Dante's relief was a physical thing, his entire body sagging as if he'd been holding himself together through sheer will alone. He started to pull away, to give her space, but Iris's hands tightened on his shirt, holding him close. "But if I'm staying," she said, looking up at him through her lashes, "I need you to promise me something. Anything, Dante said immediately, and meant it. Be patient with me. I don't know how to do this, how to be courted, how to trust that this is real and not just some beautiful dream I'll wake from tomorrow. Dante's hand came up to tangle in her white hair, his touch reverent, possessive in a way that made her omega purr with satisfaction. I have waited 3 years in darkness, Iris Shadowvale, he said, his voice a promise carved in stone. I can wait as long as you need for the light to grow comfortable in your hands. But know this, I am not a patient man by nature. And now that I've found you, now that I know you exist, keeping my distance will be the greatest battle I've ever fought. Then don't, Iris heard herself say, the words coming from some deep, instinctive place that knew what it wanted even if her mind was still catching up. Don't keep your distance. Show me. Show me what it means to be chosen, even if it wasn't by the moon. Dante's eyes blazed, and for a moment Iris thought he might kiss her, might claim her mouth the way every cell in her body was suddenly screaming for him to do. But instead, he pressed his lips to her forehead, lingering there, breathing her in like she was oxygen, and he was drowning. Not yet, he murmured against her skin. When I kiss you, Omega mine, it will be because you demand it of me, because you know beyond all doubt that you want my mouth on yours, my hands on your body, my mark on your skin. I won't steal that choice from you the way the moon steals choices from so many others. Iris trembled, caught between disappointment and a respect so profound it made her chest ache. This man, this alpha king who could take whatever he wanted, was choosing to give her power instead, was choosing to let her set the pace, to let her decide when and how and if. You're dangerous, she whispered. And Dante laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. Only to those who threaten what's mine, he said, pulling back to look at her properly. To you, Iris Shadowvale, I will only ever be a man trying to be worthy of the gift you're giving me simply by existing. He led her to a guest room down the hall from Alexander's, a space that was beautiful but impersonal, clearly rarely used. Iris stood in the doorway, suddenly exhausted, the emotions of the night catching up with her in a wave that threatened to drag her under. Sleep, Dante commanded softly, reading her with unnerving accuracy. Tomorrow we'll talk about practicalities, about what staying here means, about how we navigate this. But tonight, just rest. You're safe here. You're protected. And you're not alone anymore. Iris nodded, not trusting her voice, and Dante hesitated in the doorway as if torn between leaving and staying. Finally, he spoke again, his voice rough with something that sounded like fear. If you change your mind, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. If you wake up tomorrow and realize this was all too much, too fast, I'll understand. I won't hold you here. You're free to go whenever you choose. Dante, Iris said, and waited until he looked at her. I'm not going anywhere. The smile he gave her was incandescent, a sunrise after the longest night, and then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Iris alone with her racing thoughts and her pounding heart and the absolute certainty that her life had just changed irrevocably. She collapsed onto the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Through the walls, she could hear Dante moving in the room next to hers, the creak of floorboards under his weight, the rustle of fabric as he undressed. And she knew, with an instinct as old as time itself, that he wasn't sleeping either, that he was as awake and overwhelmed as she was, that they were both standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and impossibly beautiful. Iris closed her eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, allowed herself to dream of a future that wasn't empty. A future filled with dark hair and golden eyes, and small hands reaching for hers. A future where she was chosen not by the moon, but by something stronger, something truer. A future where she was home. Dawn came soft and golden, spilling through the windows of the guest room like honey. Iris woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar comfort of the bed, the quality of the sheets against her skin, the absence of the cold draft that usually characterized her tiny apartment. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed it all. But then she smelled it, that intoxicating scent of pine and winter storms that could only belong to Dante. And she knew with absolute certainty that it had all been real. She rose, smoothing her wrinkled dress, wishing desperately for fresh clothes and a bath. As if summoned by her thoughts, there was a soft knock at the door. Iris opened it to find not Dante, but a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, her arms full of fabric. "Good morning, Miss Iris," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Clara, the house manager. The Alpha King asked me to bring you these. We took the liberty of guessing your size, but if anything doesn't fit, I'll gladly make adjustments." Iris stared at the clothes, simple but well made, far nicer than anything she'd ever owned. "I can't accept these," she said automatically, old habits of pride and self-sufficiency rising to the surface. Clara's smile only widened. "With respect, miss, that's not your decision to make. When the Alpha King orders something, it's done. Besides," her voice softened, "it's been 3 years since there's been any light in this house. If a few dresses are what it takes to keep that light burning, then it's the least we can do." Iris felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Everyone knows already? That you carried young Alexander through the streets for hours? That you brought him home safe when no one else even noticed he was gone?" "Yes, miss, everyone knows, and everyone is grateful." Clara's eyes twinkled. "The other details, well, those are circulating too. But pay them no mind. This household has waited a long time for something to gossip about that doesn't involve grief." After Clara left, Iris bathed and dressed in one of the simple dresses, a soft blue that brought out the unusual violet tints in her eyes. She braided her white hair loosely, letting it fall over one shoulder, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked different somehow, less faded, less forgotten, almost like someone who deserved to be seen. She found Dante and Alexander in the breakfast room, a sunny space overlooking gardens that were trying their best to survive the approaching winter. Alexander saw her first, his entire face lighting up as he scrambled off his chair and ran to her. "Iris, Papa said you stayed. Are you staying forever?" Iris caught him, lifting him easily despite his weight, marveling at how natural it felt. "I'm staying for a while," she said carefully, not wanting to promise what she couldn't deliver. "Is that all right with you?" "Yes." Alexander wrapped his arms around her neck. "You can meet my friends and see my toys, and I can show you the stables where the horses live, and—" "Alexander," Dante's voice was gentle but firm, "let Iris breathe and eat. I'm sure she's hungry." Alexander reluctantly released her, taking her hand instead and tugging her to the table. Dante stood as she approached, his eyes doing a slow inventory of her appearance that made Iris feel like she was standing in direct sunlight. He was wearing different clothes than last night, dark trousers and a simple white shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful lines of his body, and his hair was pulled back in a loose tie that only emphasized the brutal beauty of his features. "You look rested," he said, pulling out a chair for her in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that made her heart flutter. "So do you," Iris replied, and realized it was true. The shadows under his eyes were less pronounced, the tension in his shoulders slightly eased. "Did you sleep?" "Some." A ghost of a smile. "More than I have in months, knowing you and Alexander were both safe under my roof." They ate breakfast together, a surprisingly normal affair despite the extraordinary circumstances. Alexander chattered about everything and nothing, his excitement palpable, while Dante watched them both with an expression that Iris was beginning to recognize. Longing, yes, but also contentment, as if some piece he hadn't known was missing had finally been found. After breakfast, Dante caught her hand as Alexander ran ahead to find his favorite toy to show her. "Walk with me?" he asked, and it wasn't really a question, but Iris found she didn't mind. They walked through the manor's gardens, Alexander racing ahead to explore while staying carefully within sight. The morning was crisp, autumn giving way to winter, and Iris pulled her borrowed shawl tighter. "You're cold," Dante said immediately, already shrugging off his jacket. "I'm fine," Iris protested, but he was already draping it over her shoulders, the garment massive on her smaller frame, smelling so strongly of him that her omega instincts purred with satisfaction. "Iris," Dante said, stopping in the shadow of a massive oak tree, its branches bare against the pale sky. "We need to talk about what this is, what it means that you're here." Iris nodded, her heart picking up speed. "I know. I've been thinking about it all night. And?" He was tense, she realized, his body coiled like a spring, as if preparing for rejection. "And I don't know what this is," she admitted. "I don't know if you're my fated mate or if this is just, I don't know, trauma bonding or convenience or—" "Stop." Dante caught her face between his hands, his touch firm but gentle, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me, Iris Shadowvale. I have lived for 35 years. I have had a fated mate, have felt that pull, have known what the moon's choice feels like. And what I feel for you is different, but no less powerful. Maybe more so, because it's a choice. My choice. Not destiny's command, but my own heart saying, 'Here, this one. She's the one I want.'" Iris's breath caught. "Dante, I'm not asking you to love me," he continued, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I am asking you to let me try to earn that love. To court you the way you deserve. To show you every day that choosing to stay was the right decision." "What if I'm not enough?" Iris whispered, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since she woke. "What if I can't be what Alexander needs? What if I can't fill the hole his mother left?" "You're not meant to fill anything," Dante said fiercely. "You're not a replacement, Iris. You're something entirely new. And Alexander doesn't need you to be his mother. He just needs you to be you, the woman who carried him through the dark and made him feel safe when the world was terrifying." Tears spilled down Iris's cheeks before she could stop them, and Dante caught each one with his thumbs, his expression infinitely tender. "Besides," he added, his voice lightening slightly, "I think the question isn't whether you're enough. It's whether I'm enough. Whether a broken king with more trauma than sense has any right to ask someone as pure and good as you to take a chance on him." Iris laughed through her tears, the sound watery but genuine. "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." "Then heal with me," Dante said, leaning his forehead against hers. "Let's be broken and healing together. Let's stumble through this and make mistakes and figure it out as we go. Just don't leave. Don't give up before we've even started." "I won't," Iris promised, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I'm staying, Dante. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." The kiss he pressed to her forehead was reverent, lingering, a promise sealed in touch rather than words. And when he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, might have been hope, might have been both. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a reason to feel again." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Iris spent her mornings with Alexander, playing and reading and helping him with the lessons his tutor assigned. The boy attached himself to her with single-minded devotion, following her through the manor like a small, dark-haired shadow, constantly reaching for her hand, constantly seeking her approval. And Iris found herself falling in love with him in the way only an Omega could, with every instinct in her body screaming that this child was hers to protect, to nurture, to love. She'd never wanted children before, never allowed herself to dream of such things when she'd been so certain she'd never have a mate. But Alexander made it easy. He was bright and curious and sweet, with his father's intensity, but none of his darkness, and Iris couldn't imagine her life without him anymore. Dante, true to his word, courted her with a patience that was clearly costing him. Iris could see it in the way his hands clenched when she was near, in the way his eyes tracked her every movement, in the way he positioned himself between her and any perceived threat with unconscious protectiveness. But he never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. Instead, he showed her who he was in 1,000 small ways. The way he governed his territory with firm but fair judgment. The way he trained his warriors with brutal efficiency, but genuine care for their well-being. The way he tucked Alexander into bed every night, with stories and kisses and promises that tomorrow would be better. And in the evenings, after Alexander was asleep, Dante and Iris would sit by the fire in his study and talk. About everything and nothing, about their pasts, their fears, their hopes. Dante spoke of his mate, of the love they'd shared, and the devastation of losing her. But also of how grief had become a prison he hadn't known how to escape. Iris spoke of her own loneliness, of watching year after year as others found their fated mates while she remained invisible, unwanted. Of the shame that came with being unclaimed, as if her lack of a mate was proof of some fundamental flaw in her being. "There's no flaw," Dante said fiercely one night, his hand finding hers in the firelight. "The moon is a fool for not giving you to someone who would treasure you the way you deserve. But I'm grateful for its foolishness, because it means I get the chance to be that person instead." 3 weeks into her stay, everything changed. Iris woke to the sound of raised voices, of running feet in the hallway. She threw on a robe and rushed to the door, nearly colliding with Clara. "What's happening?" Iris demanded, her heart in her throat. "Rogues," Clara said grimly. "They've attacked one of our border villages. The Alpha King is gathering warriors." Ice flooded Iris's veins. "Alexander?" "Still sleeping. I'll stay with him. Go." Iris didn't question the order, didn't stop to think about whether she had the right to insert herself into pack business. She just ran, following the sounds of preparation to the manor's main hall where Dante stood surrounded by warriors, barking orders with the authority of a man born to command. He was in full armor now, black leather and steel that made him look even more massive, even more dangerous. This was not the gentle father, not the patient suitor. This was the Alpha King, the warrior who had unified the territories through strength and strategy, and Iris felt something primal in her respond to the sheer power radiating from him. "Dante," she called, and he turned immediately, his eyes finding hers across the crowded hall. The warriors parted as she approached, and Iris was dimly aware of their stares, their shock at seeing an Omega approach their king during preparations for battle. But she ignored them, focused only on Dante, on the way his expression shifted from hard command to soft concern the moment he looked at her. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low. "It's not safe. If the rogues get past our defenses—" "I know," Iris interrupted, reaching up to cup his bearded jaw, feeling the tension there. "I know you have to go. I know you have to protect your pack. But promise me you'll come back. Promise me you won't do anything reckless or stupid or heroic that gets you killed." Dante's hand came up to cover hers, his eyes blazing. "Iris!" "Promise me," she demanded, her voice breaking. "Because I can't. I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I've just found you." Something in Dante's expression shattered and reformed. He pulled her close, ignoring the watching warriors, his arms banding around her with almost bruising force. "I promise," he breathed against her hair. "I promise I'll come back to you. To both of you." "Good," Iris said, and then, before she could second-guess herself, before fear could stop her, she pulled his head down and kissed him. It was nothing like she'd imagined. It was better. Dante froze for a heartbeat, shocked, and then he was kissing her back with a hunger that made her knees weak, his hand tangling in her hair, his other arm lifting her off her feet so he could hold her closer, tighter, as if he could fuse them together through sheer will. The kiss was fierce and desperate and perfect, tasting of coffee and promises and hope. and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers with a shaky laugh. "You're going to be the death of me, Iris Shadowvale," he murmured. "But what a way to go." "Come back to me," Iris repeated, her hands fisted in his armor. "Come back and I'll kiss you again. As many times as you want." "Then I'll fight like a demon to get back here," Dante promised, and kissed her once more, quick and hard, before setting her down and stepping back. He barked more orders, organizing his warriors with terrifying efficiency, and then they were moving out, a flood of fangs and claws and deadly purpose. Iris watched from the manor's steps until the last warrior disappeared into the forest, until even their scents had faded, and then she went to check on Alexander. The boy was awake, sitting up in bed with wide eyes. "Is Papa fighting the bad wolves?" "Yes," Iris said, climbing onto the bed to wrap him in her arms. "But he's strong and smart, and he'll come back to us. Will you stay with me?" Alexander's voice was small, scared, and Iris's heart broke for him. "Always," she promised. "I'm not going anywhere." They spent the day together, Iris distracting Alexander with games and stories, trying to keep her own fear at bay. But as the sun set and darkness fell, her worry grew teeth, gnawing at her insides with increasing viciousness. What if the rogues were stronger than expected? What if Dante was hurt, dying, calling for her, and she wasn't there? It was past midnight when the warriors finally returned. Iris heard them before she saw them, the sound of weary feet on cobblestones, of voices rough with exhaustion and pain. She'd put Alexander to bed hours ago with promises that his father would come say goodnight as soon as he returned. And now she ran to the front entrance, her heart in her throat. Dante was there, alive and whole but splattered with blood that hopefully wasn't his own. His eyes found hers immediately, and the relief in them was so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. "You're hurt," Iris said, taking in the gash across his shoulder, the bruising along his ribs. "It's nothing," Dante said, but he swayed slightly, exhaustion and blood loss catching up with him now that the adrenaline was fading. Iris was at his side in an instant, ducking under his uninjured arm to take some of his weight. "Lean on me, let's get you cleaned up." "I need to check on Alexander," Dante protested, even as he allowed her to guide him inside. "He's sleeping. You can see him after we've stopped you from bleeding everywhere." Iris's voice was firm, her Omega instincts taking over, demanding she care for her Alpha even if she hadn't quite admitted that's what he was yet. She led him to his chambers, a suite she'd never entered before, and sat him on the edge of the massive bed. The room was spartanly furnished despite its size, clearly a space for sleeping and little else. Iris found the bathing room and wet a cloth, returning to carefully clean the blood from his skin. "It's not as bad as it looks," Dante said, watching her face as she worked. "We drove them off. No casualties on our side. Just some injuries." "Good," Iris said, her hands gentle as she cleaned the gash on his shoulder. It would need stitches. "Hold still." She found a healing kit in the bathing room, clearly kept for exactly this purpose, and threaded a needle with practiced ease. Her mother had been a healer before she died, and Iris had inherited both her skill and her steady hands. "Where did you learn to do this?" Dante asked as she began to stitch, his voice tight with pain he was trying to hide. "My mother," Iris said, focusing on her work. "She taught me everything she knew before she passed. I used to help her in the healer's ward. You never mentioned that. You never asked what I did before I came here." Iris tied off the last stitch and cut the thread. "There, all done. It'll scar, but it should heal cleanly." Dante caught her wrist as she started to pull away, his golden eyes intense in the dim lamplight. "Thank you. For waiting. For worrying. For kissing me before I left." Iris felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I had to give you a reason to come back." "Iris." Dante pulled her closer, until she was standing between his spread thighs, his hands settling on her hips. I would have come back regardless. Because you're here. Because Alexander is here. Because for the first time in 3 years, I have a home worth fighting for instead of just a territory to defend. The words settled into Iris like missing puzzle pieces clicking into place. She reached up to cup his face, to trace the hard lines of his jaw, the soft fullness of his lips. I was so scared, she admitted. I kept thinking about all the things I should have said, all the time I wasted being cautious when I should have been living. Then live now, Dante said, his voice rough. Tell me what you want, Iris. Tell me what you need. You, Iris breathed, the truth finally breaking free. I need you, Dante Nightforge. I need you to be mine the way I'm already yours. I need you to hold me and kiss me and promise me that this is real, that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and find out I dreamed all of this. Dante's exhale was shaky, his grip on her hips tightening. It's real. More real than anything I've ever known. And if you'll have me, Iris Shadow Veil, if you'll accept this broken king with his broken heart and his broken life, then I'm yours. In every way that matters. I accept, Iris said, and then his mouth was on hers, hot and demanding, all the restraint he'd been showing for weeks finally breaking. He kissed her like a man starving, like she was air, and he'd been suffocating, his hands roaming over her body with desperate reverence. Iris matched him kiss for kiss, touch for touch, her own need rising to meet his, Omega recognizing Alpha in the most primal way possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante pressed kisses to her jaw, her neck, the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her gasp. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her skin. Tell me it's too soon, that you need more time, and I'll stop right now. Don't stop, Iris said, her hand sliding into his hair, tugging his head back so she could meet his eyes. Don't you dare stop. I've waited my entire life for this, for you, and I'm done waiting. Dante's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface, recognizing her acceptance, her surrender, her claim. Mine, he growled, and it was both question and statement. Yours, Iris confirmed, and felt the bond between them solidify, not through the moon's magic, but through choice, through want, through love that had grown from grief into something stronger than destiny itself. That night, Dante claimed her in every way an alpha could claim his mate, marking her skin with his teeth, filling her body with his presence, whispering promises against her skin until they both collapsed, sated and bonded and complete. And in the morning, when Alexander crawled into bed with them, giggling at finding Iris still there, still present, Dante wrapped his arms around both of them and knew, with absolute certainty, that he had finally found his way home. The weeks that followed were a honeymoon period, beautiful and bright, despite the approaching winter. Dante formally announced Iris as his chosen mate, and while there were whispers and raised eyebrows about an alpha king choosing an unclaimed Omega, no one dared voice their objections openly. Not when they saw the way Dante looked at her, the way Alexander had bloomed under her care, the way the entire manor seemed lighter, warmer, more alive. Iris moved into Dante's chambers, waking each morning wrapped in his arms, feeling safer and more cherished than she'd ever thought possible. She learned the rhythms of the pack, the politics of being an alpha king's mate, the weight of responsibility that came with her new position. And she discovered she was good at it, her natural empathy and kindness winning over even the most skeptical pack members. But there were challenges too. The rogues who had attacked were part of a larger group, dissidents who refused to accept Dante's rule, who wanted to return to the old ways of might making right, and their leader, it turned out, had a personal grudge against Dante, against the king who had killed his father in the war that had unified the territories. His name was Maddox, and he wanted revenge. The first warning came on a snowy morning 2 months after Iris had arrived. A dead wolf, throat torn out, left on the manor's doorstep with a message carved into the wood beneath it. The king took my father. I'll take his family. Dante's rage was terrible to behold. He immediately doubled the guards, forbade Iris and Alexander from leaving the manor grounds without a full escort, and began hunting Maddox with single-minded intensity. But the rogue leader was clever, striking at border villages and then disappearing before Dante's warriors could engage, always leaving behind that same message. Iris watched as the man she loved transformed back into the frozen king he'd been before she arrived. Watched as the warmth in his eyes dimmed, as the softness in his touch became mechanical. He was pulling away, she realized, trying to protect her by becoming someone nothing could hurt. "Stop it," she said one night, when he tried to slip from their bed to patrol again, despite having barely slept in days. "Stop what?" Dante's voice was flat, emotionless. "Stop shutting me out. Stop trying to face this alone." Iris sat up, pulling the sheet with her, her white hair falling around her shoulders like a curtain. "You promised me you'd let me in. You promised me we'd be broken and healing together. That was before there was a madman threatening to kill you and Alexander to get to me," Dante said. His jaw clenched so tight Iris was surprised it didn't shatter. "So, your solution is to push me away? To go back to being the frozen king who feels nothing?" Iris shook her head. "I won't let you. I won't stand by and watch you destroy yourself trying to be strong enough to protect everyone alone." "Then what would you have me do?" Dante exploded, whirling to face her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Sit back and wait for him to strike? Risk you and Alexander because I'm too weak to keep the people I love safe?" "You're not weak," Iris said fiercely, climbing off the bed to stand before him, completely uncaring of her nakedness. "You're the strongest man I know, but strength doesn't mean facing everything alone. It means being brave enough to lean on the people who love you when the burden gets too heavy." Dante's hands came up to grip her shoulders, his touch almost desperate. "I can't lose you," he choked out. "I can't survive losing someone I love again, Iris. It will destroy me utterly." "Then don't push me away," Iris said, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "Let me stand beside you. Let me fight with you. Let me be your partner in this, not just someone you protect." "You're an Omega," Dante said. But there was no heat in it, just helpless desperation. "You shouldn't have to fight. You should be safe and happy and far from any danger." "I'm your Omega," Iris corrected, "which means your fight is my fight. Your pain is my pain. And your victory will be ours together." She pulled his head down, pressing her forehead to his. "Please, Dante, don't lock me out. Don't go back to being alone when you don't have to be." Dante shuddered, and then his arms were around her, crushing her to his chest, his face buried in her hair. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice muffled. "Terrified. Of failing you. Of not being enough." "You're more than enough," Iris promised, holding him just as tightly. "We're more than enough. Together." They stood there for long minutes, just holding each other, finding strength in their bond, in their unity. And when Dante finally pulled back, his eyes were clearer, more focused. "All right," he said. "Together. But if things go wrong, if Maddox gets close, I need you to promise me you'll run. Take Alexander and run, and don't look back." "Only if you promise to follow," Iris countered. "I'm not leaving you behind, Dante Nightforge. Not for anything." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn Omega." "Stubborn Alpha," Iris shot back, and then she was kissing him, reminding him what they were fighting for, what was worth protecting. The attack came 3 days later, on a night when the moon was dark, and the snow fell thick enough to muffle sound. Iris woke to the smell of smoke, to the sound of breaking glass and shouting voices. She bolted upright, reaching for Dante, but his side of the bed was empty, already cold. She threw on clothes with shaking hands, every instinct screaming at her to get to Alexander. She ran to his room and found it empty, the window shattered, cold wind howling through the opening. On the floor, written in what looked horribly like blood, was a message. "Come to the old mill alone, or I kill the boy." Iris's world contracted to a single point. Alexander. Someone had taken Alexander. The sweet boy who called her mama when he thought no one was listening, who held her hand when he was scared, who had given her a reason to believe in happy endings. She should tell Dante. She should raise the alarm. But the message was clear, and she couldn't risk Alexander's life on the hope that they could mount a rescue before Maddox made good on his threat. So Iris did the only thing she could do. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen, tucked it into her belt, and slipped out into the snowy night alone. The old mill was 2 miles from the manor, a crumbling structure that had once processed grain, but now stood abandoned and rotting. Iris approached it cautiously, every sense on high alert, and found the door hanging open in invitation. Inside, lit by flickering torches, Maddox waited. He was a big man, nearly as large as Dante, with scar-crossed features and eyes that held nothing but hatred. And in his arms, struggling and crying, was Alexander. "Let him go," Iris said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Your fight is with Dante, not with a child." "My fight is with everyone who took my father from me," Maddox snarled. "And the best way to hurt the Alpha King is to take what he loves most." "Then take me," Iris said, stepping forward. "Let Alexander go and take me instead. I'm his mate. I'm worth more as a hostage." Maddox laughed, the sound cruel and cold. "Oh, I'm taking both of you. The boy I'll kill in front of the king, slowly making sure he feels every moment of pain. You?" His eyes raked over her body. "You, I'll keep, break, make you wish you'd never been born." Rage like Iris had never known flooded her body. This man, this monster, thought he could hurt her family, could threaten the child she'd come to love as her own. Her vision went red, Omega instincts rising to something more, something primal and fierce and utterly uncompromising. "You won't touch him," Iris said, and her voice resonated with power she hadn't known she possessed. "You won't touch either of us, because I am not some helpless Omega you can intimidate. I am the Alpha King's mate, and I will end you before I let you hurt my family." Maddox's eyes widened in surprise, and in that moment of distraction, Iris moved. She was across the space between them in a heartbeat, her knife out, slashing at his arm, forcing him to release Alexander. "Run!" she screamed at the boy. "Run and find your father!" Alexander bolted, disappearing into the snowy darkness, and Maddox roared with rage. He backhanded Iris across the face, sending her sprawling, her knife skittering across the floor. But she didn't stay down. She rolled, came up fighting, her nails raking across his face, drawing blood. "You little bitch," Maddox snarled, grabbing her by the throat, lifting her off her feet. "I'm going to enjoy breaking you." Iris clawed at his hands, fighting for air, black spots dancing in her vision. This was it, she realized distantly. She'd saved Alexander, but she was going to die here, in this abandoned mill, without getting to say goodbye to Dante, without getting to tell him one more time that she loved him. And then the wall exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and fury made flesh. Dante hit Maddox like a freight train, his shift incomplete, stuck between man and wolf, making him look like something out of nightmare. He tore Iris from Maddox's grip and tossed her carefully aside, then turned on the rogue leader with a snarl that made the very air shake. "You touched my mate," Dante said, his voice layered with his wolf's growl, making the words almost incomprehensible. "You threatened my son, and now you die." The fight was brutal and short. Maddox was strong, but he was nothing compared to an alpha king protecting his family. Dante ripped into him with claws and teeth, showing no mercy, no hesitation, until Maddox lay broken and bleeding on the mill floor. "This is what happens to those who threaten what's mine," Dante said, his hand around Maddox's throat. "Remember that in whatever hell you find yourself in." The snap of Maddox's neck was obscenely loud in the sudden silence. Dante shifted fully back to human form, not bothering with his nakedness, and turned to Iris. She was leaning against the wall, cradling her bruised throat, and when she saw him, alive and whole and here, she broke. Sobs tore from her throat as Dante crossed to her in 3 strides, gathering her into his arms with infinite gentleness, despite the blood coating his skin. "You stupid, brave, incredible woman," he murmured against her hair, his voice shaking. "You could have died. You should have come to me, should have—" "He had Alexander," Iris choked out. "I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let him hurt our son." Dante pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were wet, actual tears streaming down his bloody face. "Our son," he repeated, as if the words were precious beyond measure. "You called him our son." "He is," Iris said, cupping his face, not caring about the blood, about anything except the fact that they were alive, together, whole. "He's ours, Dante. Just like I'm yours and you're mine and we're a family." Dante kissed her then, hard and desperate and perfect, tasting of salt and copper and love. And when he finally pulled back, he was smiling, genuine and bright and beautiful. "Let's go home," he said, lifting her into his arms despite her protest that she could walk. "Our son is waiting, and I need to hold both of you until I believe this is real." They found Alexander with Clara, being fussed over and fed hot chocolate. And when the boy saw them, he launched himself at them with a cry of relief. Dante caught him with one arm while still holding Iris with the other, and they stood there in the manor's entrance hall, the 3 of them wrapped together, and Iris knew with absolute certainty that this was home. Not the building, not the territory, but these 2 souls who had claimed her heart as surely as she'd claimed theirs. The seasons turned, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer. The territories remained peaceful under Dante's rule, his reputation for fierce protection of his own, ensuring that no one dared threaten his family again. Iris settled into her role as Alpha King's mate with grace and strength, becoming beloved by the pack for her kindness and wisdom, and Alexander thrived, growing taller and stronger, his laughter filling the manor's halls. His joy a constant reminder of why they had fought, why they had survived. He called Iris Mama now, openly and without hesitation, and Iris's heart swelled every time she heard it. On the anniversary of the night Iris had found Alexander in the village square, Dante surprised her with a ceremony. Not a mating ceremony, they'd already completed that bond in private, but a public recognition of what she meant to him, to Alexander, to the entire pack. Standing before the assembled wolves under the light of the full moon, the same moon that had seen them meet, Dante took Iris's hands in his. "A year ago," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I was a dead man walking, frozen inside, going through the motions of ruling, of living, but not truly alive. And then this woman found my son when he was lost and afraid. She carried him for hours, protecting him with her body, asking nothing in return. She brought light into my darkness, warmth into my cold, and taught me that love isn't just something the moon gives us. Sometimes, it's something we choose, something we fight for, something we build together from grief and hope and stubborn refusal to give up." He turned to address Iris directly, his golden eyes blazing with emotion. "Iris Shadowvale, you are my chosen mate, my partner, my equal in all things. You are the mother of my heart's son and the keeper of my broken pieces, and I vow to spend every day of my life showing you that choosing to stay that first night was the best decision you ever made." Iris couldn't speak through her tears, so she simply kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude and joy into the press of her lips against his. The pack howled their approval, the sound rising to the moon that had once seemed so cruel, but now felt like a benevolent witness to the love they had forged. When they finally broke apart, Alexander pushed between them, wrapping his arms around both their legs. "Can we have cake now?" he asked, and the gathered wolves burst into laughter, the moment of solemnity breaking into celebration. That night, after the party, after Alexander had been tucked into bed with extra kisses and promises of pancakes for breakfast, Dante and Iris stood on their balcony overlooking the territories they protected together. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked quietly, his arm around her waist, holding her close against the cool night air. "Saying yes that first night? Choosing this life?" Iris turned in his arms to look up at him, this fierce, devoted man who had given her everything she'd never known she wanted. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Because you gave me more than a home, Dante. You gave me a purpose, a family, a love that I choose every day and will keep choosing for the rest of my life. Even when I'm impossible and overbearing and too protective?" Dante asked with a smile. "Especially then," Iris laughed. "Because it means you care. Because it means I matter." "You matter more than anything," Dante said, turning serious. "You and Alexander, you're my entire world, my reason for being, and I will never stop being grateful that you walked into our lives." "I didn't walk," Iris corrected, smiling through fresh tears. "I stayed. There's a difference." "Then stay forever," Dante murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. "Stay and build this life with me. Stay and watch Alexander grow. Stay and grow old with me and let me love you every day until my last breath." "Forever," Iris promised, sealing it with a kiss under the watchful moon. And in the years that followed, they kept that promise. Through challenges and triumphs, through Alexander's childhood and adolescence, through new threats to the territories and new alliances forged, Dante and Iris stood together. He remained fierce to the world, the alpha king whose reputation for ruthlessness kept his pack safe. But to her, to Alexander, to the family they had created from broken pieces, he was gentle and devoted and endlessly loving. They had more children eventually, white-haired daughters and dark-haired sons who filled the manor with noise and laughter and chaos, and each one learned the story of how their parents met, of how their mother had found their oldest brother in the darkness and refused to leave him behind, of how their father had been so moved by that kindness that he had learned to love again. It became pack legend, the tale of the unclaimed Omega and the frozen king, of the little boy who had brought them together, of the love that was chosen rather than fated and was stronger for it. Young wolves would whisper about it, wondering if they too might find such love, if they too might be brave enough to choose instead of waiting for the moon to decide. And on nights when the moon was full, Iris would sometimes stand at the same spot in the village square where she had first heard Alexander's cries, and marvel at how a single moment of compassion had transformed 3 lives completely, how being kind to a lost child had given her everything she'd ever wanted, and so much more than she'd ever dreamed possible. Dante would find her there sometimes, wrap his arms around her from behind, and press a kiss to her temple. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask. "How lucky I am," Iris would answer every time. "How grateful. How loved." "Not as loved as you make us feel," Dante would reply, and they would stand there together, watching the moon rise, remembering the night that had changed everything, and knowing that their story was far from over. Because love like theirs, love that was built on choice and courage, and the willingness to take a chance on broken things, didn't end. It only grew stronger, deeper, more beautiful with each passing day. It became the foundation on which entire lives were built, the legacy they would pass down to their children and their children's children. And when they were old, when their hair had gone fully white and their bodies had slowed, when Alexander had children of his own, and the manor was filled with grandchildren who demanded stories of the old days, Dante and Iris would sit before the fire and remember. "Tell us again," the children would beg. "Tell us about the night Grandmama found Daddy." And Iris would smile at Dante, at this man who had given her everything, who had chosen her when the moon had not, who had loved her with a devotion that had never wavered, never faltered, never dimmed. "It was the night of the choosing moon," she would begin, her voice soft but strong. "And I was alone, watching others find their mates, believing I would always be unclaimed, unwanted. But then I heard a small voice crying in the darkness, and everything changed. Because you helped him," one of the grandchildren would pipe up, having heard the story 100 times but never tiring of it. "Because she chose kindness over grief," Dante would correct gently, his hand finding Iris's and squeezing. "Because she saw someone in need and didn't look away. And in doing so, she saved not just a little boy, but a man who had forgotten how to live. And they lived happily ever after," another child would say confidently. Iris and Dante would share a look, a lifetime of love and understanding passing between them in that single glance. "No," Iris would say gently. "We chose to live happily, every day, over and over again. And that made all the difference." The fire would crackle. The children would eventually drift off to sleep, and Iris and Dante would remain, hands clasped, hearts beating in sync. Two souls who had found each other not through destiny's command, but through compassion, courage, and the simple act of staying, when it would have been easier to walk away. And in the end, that was the greatest love story of all. Not the one written in the stars, but the one written in choices, in moments, in the 1,000 tiny decisions to love even when love was hard, to stay even when staying was frightening, to believe even when belief seemed foolish. Iris Shadowvale and Dante Nightforge had not been fated mates, but they had been something better, something stronger, something infinitely more precious. They had been chosen mates, partners who had looked at each other's broken pieces and decided they could build something beautiful anyway. And they did. They built a life, a family, a love that lasted long after the moon had set on their story, becoming legend, becoming truth, becoming proof that sometimes the best love isn't the one destiny hands you, but the one you fight for, work for, choose for yourself, despite all the odds against it. And in the quiet moments, when they were alone and the world was still, Dante would pull Iris close and whisper the same words he'd said on their first night together, words that had become their promise, their prayer, their truth. "Thank you for staying." And Iris would smile against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm, and whisper back the words that had become her own truth, her own promise. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." And the moon would shine down on them, bearing witness to the love that had grown from a single act of kindness into something eternal, something unbreakable, something that proved that destiny wasn't written in the stars, but forged in the choices two souls made when they decided that together was better than alone, that love was stronger than loss, and that sometimes the best things in life came not from fate, but from the courage to help a little boy while mates were chosen, unaware that he would change everything forever. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.